So here it is Monday morning, and it's relaxing painting with Dice and Dungeons. And I'm continuing my saga of painting dungeon tiles. Painted some in blue, base coat, put highlight blocks on all of them, and then washed them. So I did that a couple of weeks ago. We're sitting in a tub over there. And then I've base coated some in gray, and I finished the highlight blocks on those last week. That all needs to be washed. But now I'm working on wood because we need some extra pieces for sets that we're putting together. And there's also a bunch of other stuff that's wood, which includes the lintels and some doors and some crates and chests and things. So there's a bunch of stuff that needs to be base coated and then washed, and in the case of like the doors and the chests and whatever, highlights painted on, like the metal banding on the chest. Okay, that'll take a little while. Or the metal banding on the doors. So there's a couple of steps involved. For example, on these doors, you need to base coat the wood and then wash it to bring out the life of the wood, and then paint the straps and the door handles on both sides silver, and then put a gray wash on the silver to highlight things like the little nail heads that appear on that. So there's, like, after the touch-up, which is what I'm going to be doing next, the touch-up, and then the wash, and then the base coat silver, and then washing the base coat. So if you add on putting the base coat on before the touch-up, there's like 5 steps that need to be done to get this door painted. Just one little door. These doors are a little bit easier. There's just a base coat that goes on the panels. That's going to be wood, and then that'll be washed to make it the color of the wood that we want, the kind of reddish, nice deep reddish color. And then all of the frame needs to be painted in a metallic. So with these, there's actually only 3 steps. What I'm going to be starting with first, though, is touching up so that I can do washing later on. Oh yeah. And then these pieces, these are the lintels for the doors, and the doors themselves, I'm using toothpicks to hold them because they have to be painted on all of their surfaces. So this looks kind of like a really horrible hors d'oeuvre tray with all the toothpicks there. But you'll see all of that in action in a while. But the first step is to touch these up, because you need to get paint down in the crevices between the boards so that those are nice and dark. And then there's a really high wood grain pattern on all of this. And no matter how much I work the paint into it, there's always some spots that form when the paint dries. These little dots, like that little dot right there. That's a flaw. I think that forms when the paint dries. It pulls away from itself because it shrinks. Anyway, got to touch up all of these guys. Touch up, these are the desktops, basically. These are a little trickier. I have to touch up the top, but also the bottom sometimes can show. So I'm going to try holding it on to the sticky tack this way so I can paint around the edges. Anyway, there's a whole lot of brown paint that needs to be done, touching up and base coating, and that needs to dry, and then I need to wash, and then I need to do some highlighting. So we'll see how it goes. If the stuff doesn't dry enough for the next step, like if the wash doesn't dry enough so that I can paint the straps on the doors, we'll just wait until Wednesday and I'll do something else. There's a whole bunch more just recently primed stone tiles there. Looks like there's mainly cut stone walls and floors, and those can be base coated too, so that'll fill some time. Need to stir up the paint. Hi, Who. No. No Bob Ross. No wigs. You might not even do a flip now. Stir this up pretty well. It's been sitting down for a couple of days. So I do need to come up with some no religion or politics, but yet still 3.5 hours of monologue topic. If anybody has any ideas about a non-controversial topic that we can turn into some sort of controversy, or at least something that's not terribly boring. Yeah, I know, oxymoron, right? Yeah, that would be fine. Oh yeah, this one, not the base coat. This I have to do it on both sides. So I'm going to do the bottom first, and then the top. I don't know if you remember, but one of the tavern tiles has a trap door in it. No, this is the door to the trap. Hinges, opens. Anyway, part of the brownness that needs to be painted today. What can we flip? Let's flip an alligator clip. Ready? There we go. We'll be using those to hold things a little later. Here's the paint. Take these off so I can see up close. This is the thing that needs to be touched up, so I'll be using a smaller brush and pushing paint down into the crevices between the boards. So, old smaller brushes that she now says is pretty beat up, and shoving the bristles down into these openings between the boards. You know, we'll beat it up even further. So there's like 3 things on these tiles that need touching up. Little white spots where the paint is pulled away. This gaps down in there. I was using a bigger brush, and sometimes the paint doesn't get all the way down in. And the corners here where it got touched as I took it off of the sticky tack stand. Got it like this. Find all the spots that aren't sufficiently base coated. Give it a semi-final inspection. There's always something. You know, even after looking it over with this level of touch-up, sometimes later on there's still problems. But anyway, so that's touched up. 10. There's 10 of these to touch up. And then after these are done, I'll probably do the doors. Maybe I'll do the lintels, just because those don't require terribly much touch-up. I was looking at them earlier. In pretty good shape. No suggestions for topics for babbling. Just paint in silence here for a few minutes and let the music play while I'm touching up this brown base coat. And then we'll talk about the Space Launch System and Orion in the Artemis program. SpaceX, because there's that too. Oh. Yeah, so the main touching up is getting paint down in these gaps between the boards, because we want that to look dark after it's washed. And then I need to check around to see if there's any glaring white spots anywhere. The ones I already looked at. Like that. See, when I turn it this way, I see a spot I didn't see before. So, yeah. Hating. Just stuck my finger in the paint, but that's okay because the surfaces are all the same color. Yeah, you're seeing the effectiveness the way these tiles are made. With all the little ball magnets in the base that hold them together. But when there's wet paint on it, you don't particularly need to have them jump and grab it onto each other. These are floor tiles that work in combination with stuccoed wall tiles, which are pretty cool. They're like those half-timbered walls that you see on houses and stuff, where the darker timbers and then there's a stucco between the boards. And the walls are like that. You won't see those today because those were done a couple weeks ago. But these are just flat floors that fill in the space between the walls, right? So they're not as interesting as the wall tiles, but they're really important. Otherwise, well, you've got walls with no floors. That misses the point. You note, more likely than not, is although this is kind of a nice brown, it's a real kind of nice chocolatey brown, milk chocolate brown color, is that it's also, it looks really flat and lifeless. And so we put a wash on it, and the wash gets a little thicker in the grooves where the wood grain color is, a little thinner on top. Gives the whole thing like a mahogany look almost. It's dark wood floor color. It's very pretty. But I don't know. Yeah, we'll probably get to that, to this later on today, because I think these will dry enough to be able to be washed after the touch-up. Because this thing goes on for another 3 hours or so, so there'll be plenty of time for that to happen. Weird There's more spots on top and not much in between the boards, almost the opposite of the rest of them. Oh yeah, I'll get around to doing the washing on these floors. I don't know if I'll, with things like the lintels and the doors and things, I don't know, there might be too many steps along the way to be able to get those all done today, because one step needs to dry before the next step. And the wash in particular, like on the wooden doors with the metal straps, the wash has to dry before the metal straps can be painted, and the wash sometimes actually takes a fairly long time to dry. I'm not sure why. I think it's a different kind of solvent that's used in it than regular paint. Anyway, we will go do as much of this as we can, because it all needs to be done eventually. And then, if we have to watch paint dry, because we can't get on to the next step with these wooden pieces, these wooden dungeon tiles, I'll work on some of the other things that have piled up on the corner there that have been recently primed. Like I'm just kind of randomly dabbling paint, because you probably can't see all the white spots. They're really pretty small. But in the light that I've got, they kind of jump out. Just dabbing brown paint onto them. Fortunately, the color of this paint is pretty consistent, and as long as I use the right color, and I almost always do now, the touch-up spots will disappear as the paint dries. And these acrylics are really good. They don't show brush marks, at least especially on the textured surfaces. You can do touch-up, and it dries nice and flat, and that doesn't leave marks either. Like, it doesn't leave little raised surfaces or anything. So it's really easy to work with these. This one's a little bit different. It's got this post sticking up. This is an inside corner. And you put it down, and a wall comes here, and a wall comes here. And so that's a corner on the inside of a room, which is especially handy if you're doing like a room within a room, that kind of thing. And if you're doing kind of maybe a little labyrinth sort of dungeon, you might want some twists and turns that you can't do with outside corners. So this little post is a wooden post that looks like it's part of two walls that come together. It was close to an example of a wall that you're going to see today in the stream. Of the opportunities to see the painting of the wood base coat on the wall, and then the washing, and then the painting of the stucco, which is the last of the steps for the wall tiles. Wooden stucco wall tiles. Okay, so those are those. I'm going to touch up these doors next because they have a lot of steps, and if I get to washing today, I want to get the base coat washed on these doors because that needs to dry before I can paint the straps and the door handles. Move this camera this way a little bit here. Yeah, so this is kind of a high priority to get these base coated and touched up so that they can be among the first to be washed. Because after the wood is washed, there's still 2 steps to go after that. So these kind of take a while. But these doors are cool. See this? The toothpick's in there. The toothpick is in the hinge pin hole on the side. And then these go into the door frame. They open and close. So the dungeon tiles we built have working doors. And then this is the lintel. This goes across the top. Like that. The toothpick is in the hinge pin hole there. So it goes like that. And opens and closes, which is pretty cool. These two not bump into each other. Just put it on an alligator clip and put it in this thing that's got a bunch of, and then holds the alligator clips. Just managed to paint my mug. And I don't have a paper towel to clean the brush. I am not prepared. I have to disappear from the camera just a little bit, because I will need to clean this brush sooner or later. And I need the paper towel to do that. They went. There they is. They are. The roll is behind me. It keeps moving. Because there's a lot of stuff going on down here. Besides this really thrilling, relaxing painting on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 until 2, almost always, except when we take breaks or vacations. And on social media, we let you know when it's not happening. So you hear that it's not happening, it is. Anyway, other stuff goes on down here. Like behind me is a whole bank of 3D printers. And those 3D printers are what produce all of these things that I'm painting. Everything gets done here. The pieces are printed. They're primed in a little paint box thing over there. Not little, actually, it's pretty big. It's like 3.5 by 3.5 by 3.5. a large paint box over there. They get primed with an airbrush, which is almost but not quite industrial grade. The third one we've tried, each one was bigger than the next until we finally got one that's more like a paint gun than an airbrush. Not quite that big, but it's, it's pretty decently sized. Really adequate to the volume of stuff that we're doing. Yeah. Side of the door handle ring there. And since I'm seeing this and seeing that I missed it on this one, I'm going to go back to the ones I did earlier to make sure that it's done there. It's metal, but it's just a ring, so the inside has to be wood. Yeah, it looks okay. Notice the touch-up on these doors looks like it's just a really heavy wood grain where the paint kind of pulled away from itself as it dried from some of the crevices. Little spots on the metal strapping I don't care about because those are going to be painted a different color. I've got two more of these. What I'll do... Well, there's just a whole lot of little bits and pieces of stuff that need to be done. Needs to be done, so plug away at it. That they dry relatively soon so I can get some wash on these pieces. I think what happened with this one is it came out of the holder, the thing that kept it vertical, and some of the paint rubbed off because it wasn't quite dry when it touched the desk, the workshop surface here. So there's a bunch of spots on this. Okay. So I think these are good enough to try now. And this is a desktop or service counter for a tavern. And I'm just going to put here on the side. And get the edges because the edges show. But the other thing is that the bottom actually shows to some extent. And I need to paint those edges. And I'm trying this. I'm putting it on the diagonal of this sticky tack holder, hoping that it will stay while I brush it. But I'm going to use a bigger brush to do that. do that in a little while. Up the top of this and check the edges. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this, which is to say, drop it on the floor. Stick this on the edge of this as well. And when I get the larger brush out in just a little while, I will paint those. So couple more toothpicks. These doors are wooden panels with metal lattice and frame, and the wood panels on the inside painted the same color as all the rest of the wood with the same color wash. So I'm going to paint the base coat on these, and what I need to do is make sure that I get this raised lattice on it, because I'm going to be painting that later. And it doesn't come down all the way to the wood surface, it's just kind of across the top. So I need to make sure that the wood color covers the inside of the raised surface. Using this little brush because it gets into the corners there. That'll show. And I'll have to paint all these little panels. Sometimes with these sets, you get things like these doors. So there's like 3 doors on the set. The doors can end up taking as much time to finish as like the whole set of tiles, just because you're painting the inside of all these panels and making sure that the corners are covered. And then you wash the whole thing and then paint the metal strappings. So like I said, with these particular doors, there's 3 steps. With the wooden doors, this will take a while the rest of it is drying. Actually, what I should do these might not be washed today is I should touch up the lintels. There isn't too much to do on those. I actually should do that. Before I finish these. These I can actually lay down because the painted surface that I care about is underneath. There's like a 32nd of an inch of raised surface with this lattice. And so, there's a little paint here and that'll get on the work surface, but it doesn't matter because it's not going to affect the parts that I care about. There's 2 sides to this door. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this door. And then I'm going to touch up the lintels for the wooden door frames so that those have a chance to dry, so that when I get around to doing wash a little bit later today, those will be dry and I can wash them as well. So the Rosin 3D printer. The Rosin 3D printer is sitting in the room across the hall from me. In the room that can be isolated and ventilated so that no one is injured by noxious fumes, although I've been told it's not as bad as people let on. We'll see. Yeah. But you're not going to see any 3D Rosin printed figures anytime soon because there are a whole lot of these dungeon tiles that need to be done because we want to get one complete production quality example of each of the sets that we have designed. So big chunks of them have already been done, and they're in bins over there to my left. But then there's things like the doors and the scatter pieces, and and then you look at it and you put the set together and go, I counted this 4 times, inventoried all the pieces, wrote it all down, all very carefully, and we're missing one. And it's like, I know I printed out like 4 copies of this, but now I can't find any of them, so now you have to sit around and wait for it to be printed and primed and base coated and everything else just to fill out a set. And that's going to happen with at least one of these sets. So you're going to have to wait for your 3D printed figures until all of that's done. But then we will have them after the new year. We'll probably be painting 3D printed rosin figures that we produce ourselves, and that might be kind of interesting. Okay, so there's the panels on one of the 2, 3, 4, 7 of these. There's actually 2 kinds of these paneled doors. There's this one that comes to a peak, and that's a single door that opens and closes. And then there is this kind, which is kind of a diagonal, and they're designed to go like that so that it's a double door that opens and closes like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is wash this brush because it's getting gummy. Get a paper towel, be right back. And I'm going to touch up lintels. Lintels are on toothpicks, and they need to be painted on all their surfaces, and then there's spots like that. So I'm going to find the spots, and then I don't have anything to hold them vertical, so I'll lay them down on one side that is dry and fine. Like this one is fine there. It's just fine. But this side needs a touch up, so that'll get touched up. This will be the case for all of them, and then I can set it down without marring whatever surface is left. This is fine on this side. Check to make sure I got all the corners, but do some spots on this side. So this is going to be the side that's up. There's a lot of these little guys. It's definitely not going to show, but these up here on top, that'll show. And the very top, because you're looking down at it, something like that will definitely show. So the top surface is flat, so there's not much wood grain on these. But sometimes when you put on the wash, I know unintentionally it can get a little streaky, but in this particular case it can be intentional. Little bits of streakiness will look like wood grain across the top. So the flaw becomes an advantage. So these will have plenty of time to dry while I paint in the panels, so that we call them iron doors, because the frames and the lattice are iron. Because as you saw, it's a little, it takes a little while. The panels are all painted, and that'll give this stuff time to dry. That's definitely not going to show because that's actually glued in, and that's against the sides of the door frame. Something like that might show right on the corner, so definitely want to catch that. This part didn't ever get painted. These aren't too terribly bad. Three of these left, and then I'll get back to the door panels. And I know everybody was pretty excited about watching those panels get painted. These little bitty indentations in the door. I've done some of those metal doors before. We experimented with a whole lot of different color combinations. And it always turned out that the part that would most often showed a flaw were the inside corners of those panels. I take particular care to make sure that those are done with the base coat, because I don't really want to go back and do a whole lot of touch-up on these things. Okay, what I'm going to do is wash that a bit. I need to mess up a brush just for this little bit of stuff, but with the bigger little brush it'd take forever. Remember, these are the surfaces of like the bar or the counter or whatever they are. They go on a stone base, kind of. And so I'm going to use this bigger brush because I don't want to brush it very hard because it'll pop off the sticky tack. But I need to paint the inside edges because these will show. And I'm hoping that the little bits there where the sticky tack is, that's not going to be a problem. But there really isn't any other really particularly good way of doing this. This is a nice soft bristled brush that holds a lot of paint, and I can get it down in there and on there without popping it off. I suppose I could lay it on a painted surface on the workbench, but that risks rubbing some of the paint off, especially on the high spots, and I don't want to do that. So we'll set that aside, and we'll do the same thing to this one. And I'm getting a lot of paint on the sticky tack, but as you can see, that has happened before. And eventually that will be replaced with fresh stuff. I don't know how far into the future eventually will be, but, you know, not today. I'm pretty sure I'm getting more than enough of the surface so that the little bit of an overhang stone base will not show. So there's that. Those are done. That brush just sort of soaked. And now we're going to go back to painting these door panels. This is the one I did before. So I would look around, especially from the top down, this, to make sure that these corners of the insides of the panels are painted so that we don't get bright spots. There, that one there isn't painted. Okay, so that. Grab another one, and I just put a toothpick into that's the little hole for the pin hinge. Hold it and not get paint too much all over me. These doors, the doors take a fair amount of time to paint, either because of little fiddly bits like these door panels, or with the wooden doors because there's 5 different steps. But they are a really nice feature. They look good when they're done. They work, so they're fun when you use the set. Because you can come up to the door and the door is actually closed. You don't have to pretend it's closed. And then it's open, so you don't have to pretend it opened. It adds a little bit of, I guess you could say, realism to your unreal D&D session. You can even decide which way the door opens. The door might open toward you, and that's a whole different dynamic than opening away from you. Because like if the door is opening toward you, then you can hide behind the door after it opens, right? But if the door is opening away from you, then whatever is behind the door could be hiding from you after the door is open. So even that's kind of a cool thing. That you can, if you're doing a D&D session, with these operating doors, you can even introduce those kinds of variables into your gameplay and actually see it happen. Just use a 2-dimensional piece and imagine that it's happening. Okay. So, silver. Do the other side. Yeah, it feels like this is taking a while to do, but I think, you know, if I were watching this later, I would see that this is going actually pretty quickly. And, you know, it's using up some of my screen time, which is important. Because, you know, if it didn't, I wouldn't have anything else to do. Of course you want to use the door as cover. So you only want to approach a door from the direction so that it opens toward you, so that you can open the door and then hide behind the door as it opens. Or better yet, you hide where the door is going to be opening, so to provide you with cover. And you make somebody else open the door and just stand there in the open doorway. So then you've got, not only are you hidden and covered behind the door, but somebody else is the obvious target. And it's certainly nothing nines would do. Nines wouldn't do that. Nines wouldn't say, "Oh, who said Rel? You must open the door while I hide behind it." Gloria, one who is good at picking locks. Take 5 minutes and open this door. Of course, the door's not locked, so, you know, it's just 5 minutes. So we stand around waiting for the door to open. Yeah. The other way you could use it as cover is you just take the door off the hinge and carry it over your head. That would be using the door as cover. Especially helpful if it's like raining out and you don't want to get wet. So this is a little uneven, the paint color, but this is going to be washed, and so that actually might be a good thing. Thing with these door frames that, you know, because the paint dries pretty nicely, I need to put a fair amount of paint on the brush so that I can jam it into these corners, and it covers there. So even though I tried, I didn't get it down in there. It's not painted up in that corner. whether it's just still wet and glossy. So I was asking around earlier today on the stream and yesterday with the family. And I babble about, well, I'm doing this relaxing painting today. There weren't any really helpful ideas. Two topics that I came up with is the space launch system versus the SpaceX Starship. I mean, most of you probably know, if you're paying attention to space travel at all, such as it is nowadays. Back in my day, it was a real thing. Program, and we spent all sorts of money getting people onto the moon just to do it. And we were able to do that with technology that was from the 1960s. And more or less, actually, even on time. That was kind of an amazing thing. But now, aerospace companies have learned how to take twice as much time and 3 times as much money to do anything. Maybe not even work. So Boeing and Lockheed and all those, mainstream aerospace companies were told, let's go back to the moon somehow. And they figured out how to take like twice as much time and 3 times as much money to do that. There was hardly anything new about any of this. The heat shield of the Orion capsule, there are lots of names, right? The whole project is called Artemis, which is the name of Apollo's sister. And it just turns out that it's a much more appropriate name, because Apollo was the god of the sun and Artemis the goddess of the moon. So the Apollo program, it sounded cool, right? And Apollo was a guy, so 1960s. But Artemis is a much more appropriate name because she's actually the goddess of the moon, and this whole thing's about the moon. Anyway, that was an aside. So it was, let's go back to the moon. So the first thing they did, all these engineers, was, well, let's get out the ancient history. We've been to the moon before. Let's see how it was done. Not all of the notes, information was kept, and so it was like, wow, we don't even know how they pulled this off, because we didn't keep all the files and the records. But it was like yesterday they were making this big deal about, this Orion capsule is going to be coming in at 25,000 miles, and that's way faster than the 17,000 miles an hour that the space shuttle and Soyuz capsules and stuff do from low Earth orbit. that's something that was done in 1969 or earlier, actually, because of Apollo 8 circled the moon in 1968. So that had already been done. And so what did they do? Well, they basically used the same material for the heat shield that they used in the original Apollo capsules. And you would have thought, well, that's going to save a lot of time and money. You just use 1960s technology over again, but no. They managed to take like twice as much time and 3 times as much money to just duplicate something that had been done more than 50 years ago. Anyway, not a very impressive display of modern materials engineering. Although they did go out of their way and say, well, we're using new techniques to attach it to the capsule. So in the Apollo program, they, granted the capsule was smaller and lighter. You have more creature comforts nowadays, I guess, for the astronauts. Anyway, so that was, the heat shield was done as just one big honeycombed piece. It's a honeycomb matrix with the ablative material inserted into the honeycomb. And this time they used tiles like they did on the space shuttle. So there's like 12 or 1,500 of these tiles or something attached to the bottom of the capsule. I don't know. There's some reason, if you're just looking at fail-safe, but your redundancy and all of that, if you've got one solid piece, right? One solid piece of the heat shield, and you're careful in your manufacturing and your testing and all of that, somehow it seems like less can go wrong with that, just in terms of failure, than if you got 1,200 tiles that are glued to the bottom of your spacecraft. The glue doesn't hold on like 3 of them or something. How many can you lose before there's a problem, and in what locations? So now you've got 1,200 opportunities for something to come loose as opposed to one single piece. Anyway, it worked. That's good. It didn't, they all seem to have held on at least long enough to get through the atmosphere, but I thought it was kind of funny that basically they used the same heat shield materials once they figured out what they were, and were able to replicate them as was used way back in the Apollo program. And then, I suppose, in an effort to save time and money, I suppose it could have taken like 3 times as long and 5 times as expensive, decided that they weren't going to build anything like new in terms of the space launch system. So, sometimes how you get a jetliner, passenger jet, and they make a stretch version by cutting the fuselage and inserting another piece. That always makes you feel comfortable, right? So if you're flying in a 757 stretch or an Airbus 321 stretch or something, and what that means is that they basically split the fuselage and stuck another piece of it in to make it longer. And you hope, well, this thing was engineered so that the engines and the wing and the control surfaces and everything were finely tuned to the dimensions and the weight of the plane. You kind of hope that, well, just by chucking another section in, you didn't screw up everything else. But anyway, it seems to work. But I always thought that was kind of a little bit risky thing to do. Anyway, the story is that they did pretty much the same thing with the space launch system. So the main cylinder, can't really call it a fuselage, but the main cylinder of the space launch system is a fuel tank. You have noticed that it's a very familiar orange color. It's essentially the external fuel tank from the space shuttle. So they said, well, yeah, we need a fuel tank, so we've got one. Yeah, just do a stretch version of the external fuel tank from the space shuttle, and we'll stick the engines on the bottom. You know, instead of it being external and piped in through hoses into the engines. You know, that would be more efficient. So, yeah, the main cylinder of the space launch system is a stretch version of the external fuel tank in the space shuttle with the engines stuck on the bottom of it. And the engines, the rocket motors, are space shuttle motors. So those didn't have to be engineered from scratch. So yeah, so instead of the three of them that were on the bottom of the space shuttle, they got four of them on the bottom of the space launch system, but they are in this case, literally, I think at least a couple of them had actually flown before on the space shuttle. So they are the same. And I hope they kept the drawings because these didn't come back. You know, maybe that's why they've only got like three. Maybe that's why they've only got 3 Artemis launches planned. You know, at least that they're talking about, because maybe that's all the leftover space shuttle engines that they've got. You know, nobody's making them anymore. So yeah, so you got the same engines, literally in this case, some of the same engines that the space shuttle flew, stuck on the bottom of what is just a stretch version of the external fuel tank of the space shuttle. And then there's the solid rocket boosters on either side. Did those look familiar? Well, they should, because those are stretch versions of the solid rocket boosters of the space shuttle. They're not the same, they're not reusing any of them, but basically, yeah, they're just stretch versions of that. So there's this massive space launch system, the most powerful rocket in the world today, which is true. Basically a whole pile of used parts. Space capsule is largely a result of reverse engineering some of the old Apollo stuff and updating it with some new materials and fabrication techniques. Because of that, because they didn't have to do any, terribly much built from scratch kind of stuff. Yeah, that's why it's late and expensive than originally. Too. Anyway, it's not that impressive, in terms of a feat of engineering. You just take a bunch of used stuff, like taking, say you want to do some vintage rally racing or something, and you get an old MG, just say like an MGA or something, and it was originally built with drum brakes, this really something special. We're going to put disc brakes on instead. But you do this upgrade that in fact improves performance significantly. As you slow down and slide through the turns. But that doesn't explain why it took you twice as long as it took to build the original car from scratch to adapt some disc brakes to the body frame, and everything else pretty much staying the same. Anyway, it was really cool that we sent something to and around the moon. At least potentially could hold people. And that it all worked. That it all worked is really good. But as an effort, when you compare it to the original Apollo program, where everything was being done for the very first time. Nothing had ever been launched that far, much less, well, yeah, it had. There had been probes to the moon that landed on the moon already. I mean, there had been those little robots with cameras and sensors and stuff that had been done several times, but nothing that could carry humans and safely land on the moon and come back. And the coming back part, that was a pretty tricky thing too, because that hadn't done before. And entering the Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, way faster than anybody had ever entered it before, without burning up, that had never been done before either. So all of this stuff in the original Apollo program that was done, granted, it costs huge amounts of money. But if you were to adjust it for all the inflation between now and then. But that was all pulled off. This time it was, done with that experience behind you, so it had all been done before. People knew what worked and what was rejected as impractical. Not a spectacular engineering feat compared to the original program. But anyway, that's my take on that. And it's really kind of sad that these companies that had been at the forefront of pulling things off that never been pulled off before, the aerospace companies, Boeing and Lockheed and whatever is left, because so many of them got absorbed or went out of business since their heyday back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They spend a huge amount of money and they can't get it right. It's like the crew capsule up to the International Space Station. So SpaceX, this private company, and you can say what you will about, how it was formed originally and who's responsible for it, everything. But the fact is that they got theirs up and running, and it's all working, and they've done it many times, and the incumbents that had decades and decades of experience and supposedly, outstanding engineers and all of that, still haven't gotten it right. I need different toothpicks. Wash off this brush, and I'm going to re-stir the paint. It's starting to get a little skimming on the top. Anyway, I just think it's kind of sad that these companies that were incumbents that should be able to just do these things they should be able to do these things practically in their sleep because they've done it before. Can't successfully compete with a company that just started up, either in terms of time or money. So yeah, so the Space Launch System managed to launch. That was good. It all worked perfectly, pretty much, I guess, as far as anyone is saying. Yeah, that happened. But at the same time, little holes on these particular doors are either larger than the other ones, or these toothpicks are thinner. We're not going to have to drill these holes out, it looks like. Yeah, we can't keep up. So that brings us to SpaceX. So instead of, Artemis, named after Greek goddess of the moon, and Orion and all of that stuff, they call it Starship. Or Starship. Yeah, there's actually a chance, some chance, that this Starship would send people around the moon about the same time as the Artemis program does. Artemis is scheduled to have their second launch, maybe next year sometime, about a year from now. And what they're going to do is they're going to send a crew with like 3 or 4 people into orbit around the moon, or at least I think pretty much like the same distant retrograde orbit that this last one did. So it's not going to like circle the moon over and over again like Apollo 8 did. It's just going to kind of loop around it like this mission did. Anyway, yeah. So about a year from now. But SpaceX, and I don't know if they'll be able to pull this off, but they might come close. SpaceX is planning to send its capsule. Actually, it's not a capsule, it's the Starship. Yeah, so they're planning to send this around the moon, carrying, I think they're talking about like 9 people. This huge group of people around the moon, and they're just tourists. There's some rich guy paying hundreds of millions of bucks to fly around the moon, and taking 8 people along, because why not? Yeah. So NASA's making this big deal about we're going back to the moon, we're circling the moon, and then we're getting ready to land on the moon. With the Space Launch System that's made up of used parts or reconfigured old technology. SpaceX is potentially, at least almost at the same time, sending a whole scad load of tourists around the moon. But we'll see, because the upper stage, the Starship's thing, the weird stainless steel thing with the little winglets at the front and the back, that looks like a 1940s and 1950s, maybe even 1930s fiction, science fiction spaceship. I think those little wings and things are actually functional. They help it stabilize itself in the atmosphere. It goes up and comes back down. They tested that, and they seem to be getting it to work now. So it goes up and comes back down without blowing up. That's a good thing. But they haven't tested the booster, the launch vehicle to which this is the second stage. That hasn't been tested yet. See if they get that off the ground yet this year. This year being next year, 2023. The SpaceX does those modular things. They've got these Dragon engines. It's just they make one engine, which seems to be pretty reliable. They've used it a lot. They use the Dragon engine, and if they want to lift more stuff, they just pack more engines in. So like the Falcon 9 uses 9 of them, because that's what it is, the Falcon 9. Falcon Super Heavy basically bundles 3 Falcon 9s together. There's one in the middle and one on either side. Instead of solid fuel expendable rocket boosters, they just use basically the same thing as the Falcon 9, and they just strap them onto either side. And I guess there's some real efficiency in that. It's the same thing used over and over. Their landings success rate is pretty high. You can reuse them multiple times after they, inspect and recondition them. This rocket that will launch, I forget how many are in the Starship. Is it 27 of them or something? I don't know. They packed a whole lot of them into the bottom of the Starship part, which is actually designed to be the second stage of the system. And then the rocket that is going to launch that has yet even more. You get like huge redundancy and efficiency. And the other, when you start packing 27 of something, instead of having like 5 opportunities or 9 opportunities for failure, you got 27 opportunities. But I'm guessing that with that many engines, that there's some redundancy built in, that is, like 2 or even 3 of them fail, that there's enough thrust left from the rest to get it to where it's going, or certainly enough to get it to a safe place, like a safe altitude for a successful separation and landing. The one thing I'm definitely not understanding, is this Starship thing, the big stainless steel thing with the fins and everything, is designed to be like an orbital vehicle, or the vehicle that actually goes to the moon and back. It's one thing to go up, 100 miles or something, or 50 miles, and come back down and land. But if you're coming back at 25,000 miles an hour, how does the stainless steel construction, it's just a thin shell, I don't quite understand how that re-enters the atmosphere. without a catastrophic burning up. Does it use reverse thrusters to slow down? I mean, because if you're in orbit, you're going 17,000 miles an hour anyway. That's the orbital velocity you need to be able to remain in orbit. And how do you get that thing back down without the friction just simply burning through that really thin stainless steel hull? It's supposed to work. Guess we'll find out. They're supposed to launch some into orbit this in 2023. And I guess, and this is weird too, that that Starship thing has been chosen to be the landing vehicle. The future NASA missions. Park one of those up in lunar orbit, and then supposedly down the moon and come back up. Yeah, I've seen some major flaws in the painting here. I'm going to have to go back over these doors because as I'm looking down at them, I'm seeing that especially the bottom part here wasn't adequately painted. I was kind of looking at them all from the wrong angles. I'll quickly go over all of these that I have done before I do the very last one to make sure that that's what I'm looking at here is the little ridge on the bottom. And you're looking down at the door. I want to make sure that that's painted. And it might have just been, no, see, like here too. It's just not, it just didn't get done. The angle I was holding it and the angle of the brush. But better to check now and catch it than later and have it be looking good. Anyway, so that's my concern, that this whole space launch system thing just not an impressive feat of engineering. And it's really cool that it worked and that it completed its mission and everything tested well. Case, no, that it is yet another full year before they can launch another one. I don't know, maybe it was scheduled because they weren't sure what they were going to find on this one and they want to give themselves enough time to, fix anything that needed to be fixed. I'm not sure why, but it's taking a long time between launches. Once the Apollo thing got going, they were actually more frequently than that. And then you got SpaceX doing their thing, and if they can pull off safely what they're planning to pull off, they're just going to catch up and pass the whole thing that Boeing and Lockheed's doing for NASA. Got one left. And if I recall, it was hard to get the toothpick in. So we'll see if we can't get that. upside down from the way I wanted it, but we can hold it like this just as well. Anyway, next, the Artemis Orion program, that was, was a cool thing that happened. I think there must have been really underpowered. Recalling correctly, they actually didn't have the real second stage. It was like a stand-in for the second stage, which wasn't ready for launch yet. And so back in the Apollo days, it took like 3 days to get to the moon and then 3 days back. And the Orion capsule took like 7. It was more than twice as long on each end of the journey, which means that it's traveling much more slowly, at least in between. And that just might mean that when it left, it had enough thrust to get out of the Earth's gravitational pull, but it didn't get going very fast. Now, part of it is, when you had the Apollo program, there were people in there. The longer it took to get there, the more oxygen you needed, the greater the risk that something could go wrong. You're exposed to pretty intense radiation when you're out in open space and you don't have any protection against it. Yeah, so there was this sense of, we needed to get there quickly rather than kind of lingering around, enjoying the view. Hey, but I was surprised at how long it took to make the trip there and back. Yeah, let's see. We're almost done with the last. This is the last side of the last door. On time here. Yeah, I think there's a couple of other little bits that I want to put base coat on. And then I'm going to take my break. We will come back and do washing and make these things look nice. These might even dry enough by the time I'm done washing all the other things. These might even be dry enough to get done too, which would be cool. So then I can move on to painting the metallic frames and lattices. And there's some, a little bit of risk in washing the panels before painting the lattices and the frames, because if I get paint down into the panels, then I have to redo the panel and rewash it. Anyway, hopefully there won't be terribly much touch up, and if there is, it's just tiny little pinpoints of paint. That will be easy to do. I'll put those aside. Now, what I've got left here is we've got a trapdoor in the back of the trapdoor, a chest. This chest is pretty cool. And there's a lot of wood on it, but then there's also a lot of banding. And then these crates. And the thing with the crates is that the upper part is in this brown color and the lower part is in a darker color. So, just looking to see if there's little white spots everywhere on these floors. I'll just do a real quick touch-up thing. Anything that kind of jumps out. Just by touching up, there's still spots here and there. End up disappearing with the wash. It'll all come out in the wash. So I need to use these sticky tack things. I'm going to take these off. I'm just going to set them in paper towels so that they see. This crate here, the bottom is painted metallic, so that'll be fine. And the door is, I'm going to paint the bottom of it first, and this is another one of those multiple level things that need to be washed. And I painted and then washed again, just like the wooden doors. There's all sorts of little print. There's threads all over this one. Okay, I'm going to paint the front of it first, just to make sure that it looks okay. And then I can just paint the back later. But this is the critical part here. Put the brown paint on everything to make sure that it's covered well. It does look better with the brown paint on it. It looked, how can I say, fuzzy? Like there's this bunch of threads from the 3D printing process, but the paint seems to be covering it and holding it together pretty well. So this should look okay when it's done. So anyway, I want to base coat this. Sooner than later. This will probably need touch up because there's a lot of texture where the paint didn't get deep into the grooves. Just a lot of texture for paint to pull away when it dries. Touch up with certain spots here and there, but that turned out okay. And then I'm going to paint the base coat on the chest. And just like on the doors, the important part here is to get it up into the corners and kind of along the edges of where the banding is later, to make sure that there aren't any spots where the primer shows through when the metal goes on. Because it's, until I paint the metallic banding, don't really know where the edge will be. And for a lot of this stuff, sometimes less important, or where the line is between one color and the next. Where it is less important than it being even. So if I paint the base coat onto it, that gives me more flexibility in the location. And you can see that this, this will take a little bit of work because there's a lot of banding on it. Here and here and here, and there's handles. So there's a lot of detail work to be done with the metallic color. Check the color chart to see what color the metal banding and handles will be. Getting this brown base coat on here. And this will be washed just like all the other wood. And the wash will get all over where the metal goes. And then later on, with a really nice fine brush and a steady hand, we'll be painting the handles and the metal banding. And hopefully not requiring terribly much touch-up on the already washed wood undercoat. So, could be using a bigger brush on this, but this one's already saturated with paint. So we'll just brush with the little bitty brush using the touch-up brush. And spots. And then I need to paint the rounded top. Paint all over the top of this. Get it down into the spaces between the boards and into the corners. These little, they call them scatter pieces, I think, really are cool in the sets, in the dungeon sets, because, you got this warehouse looking thing, and then you got a couple of crates and a chest sitting in the corner. And they look nice, and in gameplay, they give you things to like hide behind, push out in front of you, that kind of thing. So you can actually, they're not just for looking, because they're not attached to the floor or anything like that. With free play, you can have your character carry one and move it around. You can put them wherever you want. You can hide behind them. You can knock them over. All sorts of cool things when they are separate pieces and not just a part, a mobile part of the tiles that you're playing with. So yeah, I mean, it's worth taking the time to do these because they're just really kind of fun things to have. There's nothing, who knows what's in this chest? Oftentimes we find in our gameplay that they're locked, and then we open them and pry them open and blow them up and all sorts of things, and it turns out they're empty anyway, so why bother? But that's just all part of the DM's torment of the players. Okay, so we got doors, we got lintels, we got other kinds of doors, we got floors, we got countertops. We don't have these crates because these crates the base color underneath, which is what I want to paint first, rather than painting up to these other things, is a different color brown. So when I come back, maybe that's the first thing I'll do is I'll get out the other color brown and paint those. Maybe not, because these things, I have to use the sticky tack things to hold them. And unless these are dry enough by then, we'll see. Won't be able to do that. Anyway, clean out these brushes. I think what I'm planning to do after the break is get out the wash and wash all of these pieces that I have base coated and touched up. At least many of them. Looks like, unless I've got something that will hold the lintels and the doors, and I don't have enough alligator clips to do that, I can't set them down once they're washed because all the surfaces are painted. So I might have to hold off on some of them until the others are dried. So I want to get the doors done first, because after the wood is washed, there's still 2 steps to do to finish the metallic parts. And can't do that till the wash is dried. So I'm going to do the washing on those first before I do the lintels. With these doors, I can wash the panels and just set this on the workbench, and the wash will probably get on the workbench, but it won't hurt anything because the raised surface gets painted later. At least that's the hope. I'll probably use this brush to put the wash on the wood. There's an even bigger brush, this one. I use this for the dungeon tiles, the floors and the walls, the stone, because it just spreads it more evenly. But with these wooden tiles, a lot of it is making sure that it gets into the nooks and crannies, and slightly smaller brush will do that. So, yeah, I'm going to put there's this spot, almost like something fell on it there. Yeah, depending on whether those things on the sticky tack are dry enough or not, I might do the base coat on these grates with the other brown color. Otherwise, I'll start washing after the break. So I am going to be gone for probably 15 to 20 minutes. I'll just say 20 minutes, give or take 5. Okay? And I'll be back, and we will see these dull brown wooden tiles come to life. Back from break. See you soon. These breaks always seem to take a little longer than I think, because there's always something that needs to be done, or or someone wants to chat or get an email or whatever. Anyway, back, and what I'm going to be doing is starting to wash the wood. And I think I'm going to start with these doors because I want them to dry, and it takes a while. So I'm going to wash these doors, and I'll do the floors, and I'm going to do these other doors. And then if I can find a place to put these doors, then I will do the lintels. And what I said, well, I'm going to be right back. Talked originally about doing was getting like a piece of styrofoam or something, which I couldn't find right away, so I could just stick the toothpicks into it to hold it upright. But what I found was, and I think this will work, I found this cat scratch pad. We have a lot of these. Yeah, it actually works. See that? I can stick it in the holes there, and it holds it up. So I'm going to be able to wash all of these lintels and doors, and I'll be setting them into this cat scratch pad over to the side here. When I'm doing the floors, take these things off. Whoa, that needs touching up. I knew it would, that particular one. There's just a lot of spots that need to be touched up on this little trap door. This chest too. I probably should do the touching up on these things now. And then they might have enough chance to dry. And I might even be able to wash them later. So I'm going to do that real quickly. Because the further along I can get this today, the better it will be in the long run. I used a little brush on this and didn't really get enough paint on some of the surfaces. And I just look around and touch up the chest here. I'll just leave it on here. I'm not going to be needing this for anything. This one had this really, really rough surface, and the paint pulled away from lots of spots. So I might even have to do this again, but I'm going to swap a bunch of paint onto it, and hopefully cover the things that need to be covered. This trapdoor is kind of a cool thing. And it fits into an opening on one of these floor tiles. Yeah, I'm going to have to move the camera in a little bit. I'll do that after I get this done. And hopefully that will work. But yeah, this cat scratch pad will hold all of these toothpick things just fine. So this is the wash that I use. It's called Smoky Ink. It looks in the tray here, and it looks kind of greenish actually, but there's a fair amount of red in it, and so it makes the wood just really pop. But I'm going to wash the doors first, because those take a fairly long amount of time to dry. And I want to give this a really good stirring, because the solvent, there's a lot of solvent and not very much pigment in these, and if the pigment settles to the bottom, all I get is solvent on top and pigment on the bottom, and the first ones I do are very lightly washed, and the next ones are very heavily washed, and then it looks pretty uneven. So it's this little magic vibrating, rotating, stirring thing to mix up the. So this I have to squeeze out a couple drops at a time. And then the idea is to spread it as evenly as possible on all of the wooden surfaces, working it especially into the wood grain. And I don't want to get it on there too thick and heavy. Look even. So we'll see how this goes. When I did the wooden floors before, it worked really well. So let's see if I can make it work really well on the doors. The question we're going to have once this dries is, and we see how it looks, is whether we'll take the black wash with an extremely fine brush and wash the gaps between the door boards. Because I've done that before. Anyway, I think I showed it to you, this just to highlight the boards and distinguish them from each other. I'm not sure if this will work the same way or not. I'm going to brush it against the grain because I want it to get into the grain. I also want to get it inside the door handle. It's a little bit tricky there. So yeah, brush it across the grain, but you can see the difference between washed and not washed, just in terms of how the grain shows and the color change. Yeah, this really brings the wood to life. It's very nice. Although it still works with the base coat underneath. A little more convenient if I put it on the side. Yeah. Continue the same process of brushing it on and in to the wood grain and the contours in the print. I don't need it much on the metal straps, but as you can see, I'm trying to brush this across and get it even. So that's why it doesn't matter that the metal straps are getting covered because they're going to be painted over later. So I can actually press that on the surface underneath, but then I want to brush across so that it doesn't pool up on the high surfaces, but pools into the lower surfaces. And then we'll see how these look when they dry. Just brushing it in this way with the grain to get the ink or the wash into the grain, and then brush across the top so that it's lighter, a little bit lighter on the top and darker in the recesses of the wood grain. And so that it's even. Yeah, well, I didn't do what I said I should do, which is to paint the tops and the bottoms first. So I'll do that next. So yeah, work it into the grain and then across the grain to make it even and to concentrate it into the lower areas. That seems to be working pretty well. So in the next one, I'm going to do the edges first. I want to make sure I don't, I better check the other ones to make sure I got all four edges. I'll do that before I finish. After I finish this one, I mean. Before I start the next one. These. Make sure I get all four sides, especially the top. The top will show later. Okay. And look at me, I'm remembering to do the edges first. Music has stopped. Yeah, it has. I don't know. I'm not sure why that would have happened. I will have to see what, if anything, can be done about that. But thanks for noticing. Guess it must have stopped during the break and didn't come back. I'm not really quite sure how that would have happened or what I can do about it without disrupting the whole stream. I can try to fix it. or I can ask for technical help. Let me finish these doors first. this this wash to just be wasted in the well here. After I finish these doors, I can interrupt briefly to see if I can get the music going again. You can see the little line on the top there. There's a little green line for this microphone and a little green line for the music, and the little green music line is not there. Got this door and one more that I want to finish, and then I'll see what I can do. We've got these done. I'm going to just rinse off the brush there. And let me see if I can. I think it's this one. The screen. This with it. Okay, I'm going to just have to get some technical assistance here with the music. So I'm going to take another quick break. This will be quick, just to find out what might be happening. Be right back.
gets turned off easily.
Yep. So music is running again. Yay! And I got a lesson in how to fix it. At least it's supposed to be running, but I don't see the audio meter. So is the music running? The little music line was on, but now it seems to not be on. Anyway, we'll let it go for a minute and see what happens. I'm going to get this brush cleaned off, dried off, and we will continue our washing. And I'm just going to wash these lintels because we're having so much success. The cat scratch holder, toothpick holder technique. We might as well just finish these up. Let's see how this works. I actually want this to be kind of streaky. A lot of surface area on these things, so this might take a bit. And it doesn't look like much, but there's all sorts of nooks and crannies, and you need to get the backs and bottoms. Got one way too heavy there, so I'm going to pull another one up quick so I can start spreading the extra wash onto something else before it ponds up and dries and gets sticky here. Not such a problem in the bottom, but on top it would just look weird. Okay, well, this one's done. So I'll just stick this in. Whoa. Okay, well. I'll say that worked as well as I wanted it to. I used the other technique. The toothpicks go too deeply into it. Well, basically, there's not enough sticking out from the ends of the toothpicks, and it went right up against the cardboard instead of being in the air. So we'll just do it the way I did it before, which is to stick them in some little holes there and scatter them around. But we'll get these done, and then we'll get the floors done. Actually, I'm going to do the other doors next, so those have a chance to dry. The floors can actually come last because once they're washed, they're done, unlike the doors and some of the other scatter stuff. Yes, I'm not seeing the music line, so I really don't know if it's on or not. because I can't see or hear the actual stream. It's like I'm looking at a monitor, but not on kind of upwind of the stream, not downstream. So if someone is listening, you could let me know. If not, we can try something else. I'm trying to make sure I get all the surfaces, because with this wash, if something is missed, it really jumps out, because the color and the texture actually is so different between washed and unwashed. Completely covered. As I'm doing more, the technique becomes a little bit more consistent, and I can move quickly. Yes. So get all the lintels done, and then we'll do the panels on the door, the metal doors, the ones that have the metal frames in this. Do the floors last, because like I said, once the floors are washed, they're done. Actually, it's true of these lintels too, but it's basically just doing all the toothpick held at once first. But once the floors are done, they're done, whereas the doors still need one or two more steps. So we'll put those to dry. That's a lot. Gummed up, but clumped up on the surface. That isn't going to show very much. Checking all the surfaces. And we already got 4 more of these, so this is coming along okay. I think part of it is that the brush starts getting saturated with the wash, and it just spreads better. So yeah, on the wooden doors, what needs to be done are the metallic straps, and the door handles need to be painted silver, and then they're washed black. And the reason they're washed is that there's detail on there. There's some, just like nails, hobnails or something holding on the straps, and those, we want those details to show. So those will be painted kind of a lifeless silver color, and then black, well, just a light wash, carefully applied so it doesn't get all over everything. yeah, to just show those details. The lattice and frames on the metal doors are just painted dark silver. It's called steel, or I might use gunmetal, which has the same kind of effect, but the paint is a little bit easier to work with. Those don't get washed, so those are just one more step as opposed to two more steps. And we got two more of these. I'm gonna squeeze some more out of this, and then we'll mix it up again before proceeding with the rest of it. Keep the wash mixed up. It's getting near the bottom of the bottle, and that's where it's really possible that the pigment could clump up on the bottom and change the color profile of the wash pretty significantly, and I don't want that to happen because I want this to look uniform, especially as I do this the floors, because I want those floors to look like the whole pile of other floors that were already done with this wash. So do this lintel. Pick it now. This one. There's still a puddle of wash in the well here. Do something that isn't right next to other things, so to speak. So I don't want to start using it on the floor. I'm just going to do this chest. I think there's enough here to wash this chest, so we'll do that. And the trick here is just to make sure it gets in all the nooks and crannies. And I don't particularly care if it gets onto where the metallic surface will be, because these bands, those will all be painted metallic. The wood part of the chest to look all the other wood looks. So working the wash into the nooks and crannies of this. Spreading it around so that it gets into the wood grain really nicely. So you can't see it anymore. The parts that will be painted metal are now just all messed up, but it's part of the plan. Just all look beautiful when those bands are very carefully painted. The color and the metallic color does not get all over everything else. And there's a little left, so yeah, I'm going to do the trapdoor too. The back of the trapdoor needs to be done, but that could be done some other time. This is the same sort of thing I did with the other wooden doors, is I need to work the paint in to all the wood grain and the inside of the doorknob there. It's the same sort of thing, get all the sides and then paint across so that it's concentrated in the inner parts and not the outer parts there. And I got these guys. Those might need to wait a little bit. Just to give you a hint of what's coming next, I'll be painting the panels in these doors. And it's going to be working the paint, the wash into all the crevices, and then painting across to pick up the wood grain of these panels and trying to make it look kind of even. So that's what I'll be doing with the next batch that I'm going to squeeze out of the bottle here. But I'm going to give this a stir first. And then we'll run the door panels here. It's great fun, messy work, just smushing this into all the nooks and crannies and crevices and painting across. And I was just going to lay these down, they're all toothpicked, but I don't have to because I've got this other thing here that is working well with the doors. The toothpick holder will be essential when I do the metal frame and lattice, because clearly I can't hold them to the edges when I do that, so I have to hold it on, of course. Just like the other doors, they have to be done on all of the surfaces. Here I can hold the edges because they're not painted yet. And if I smudge on them, that won't matter because they're not painted yet. Oh yeah, the trick here is to make sure I get both sides of the door. I can just really see that, is I'll do one side and then just forget the other one. There's both sides. Okay, one busted toothpick. Well, this moves along pretty quickly. This is not taking a great deal of skill or time. It's mainly just mushing the stuff in and trying to make sure that the surfaces are pretty evenly covered. And then later on, the lattice and the frame will get painted a dark silver color that will either be called steel or gunmetal, and the whole thing will look very different. It's just a mess like this. That part of the painting is when you just do the edges and the raised surface, and it makes all of this messy mess disappear. We've got 5 of these doors left to do, 4 of them after this one is done, and then I'll do the floors. So basically just sort of brushing over this, to try to get it uniform. If it piles up in the corners a little bit, I think that's okay, because that'll just look like shadows. Making sure that I'm getting into all the panels and the corners of the panels so that it looks, the whole thing looks like this wood color that we want it to look like. a little bit much on this one, so I'm going to try to brush it off and use it on the other one. But I just want to soak up some of the spots where it's a little too heavy. So as we get into the final stages of the stream today, I just want to say thank you for everybody who has joined in. If you aren't already, you're definitely welcome to become a follower. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with some breaks occasionally for vacations and just breaks. But those are usually announced ahead of time, either on a preceding stream or social media or both. But unless you hear otherwise, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we do this relaxing painting with Dice and Dungeons. And for the foreseeable future, however long that is, it's foreseeable. We'll be continuing to be painting dungeon tiles and the accessories like doors and scatter, which include chests and flaming traps and things like that. We'll be doing that until we complete one each of production quality dungeon sets, which will then be featured on our social media, so everybody will get to see what they look like. But yeah, so for example, on Wednesday I will be doing some base coating. Well, actually on Wednesday what I'll probably be doing is painting the metal parts of these doors. I'll be spending some time doing the lattice and the frames on these particular doors, because that's how these are done. So, metal doors with wooden panels. So I'll be doing the metal frame and lattice for these, and the metallic straps and doorknobs for the wooden doors. And probably the metallic part, since I'll have the metal paints out and I'll have a steady hand. And we'll be doing that kind of thing anyway. Probably the trapdoor and the chest as well. These to do. And then I'll wash out the brush and squeeze out some more. Probably stir it up again just to be sure. And then I'll do the floors. Just enough of this. And if I mush the brush down into it, I can just get this one done, I believe, without having to squeeze more out. Yeah, it looks like I can get enough coverage from what's in the brush here. And get down into those nooks and crannies. This looks so scabby, but what's important is that the panels are done, so that when I paint across it, nice clean lines on the raised surfaces all the way around. The door will look really pretty cool, but right now it doesn't. Excuse me. Just aspirated a little bit. So the task here now is to do these floors and to make the floors all look the same. There's 10 of them, plus the post for the inner thing. And I'm going to stir this up again because I want to keep it as nicely and uniform and suspended as I possibly can. Getting down to like the bottom 25-30% of wash in the bottle here, and that's where there'll be an opportunity for the pigments to cool. Looks like so far, as long as I'm doing that periodically, it's doing okay. So yeah, I'm going to be doing the surface first. We'll do this one. Do the surface first to make sure I work it into the wood grain. And then I'm going to paint across it to make sure that it is darker in the wood grain area than on the surface, so that it looks like it should. Because I want it to pool up in the spaces between the boards and wood grain. I want the same thing to happen on this post. So I'll paint it with the grain to make sure it gets into the grain. And then I'll brush across the grain to get it into the areas there. And yeah, that's what I'm doing. All these surfaces. And I'm trying to keep it from puddling in areas I don't want puddled, like there's too much. Okay, and I also then want to get around the whole side of it. And in this particular case, holding it with a glove doesn't have the same effect as it did with the paint. It doesn't, as long as there's some on my glove, it doesn't pull it away, which is kind of nice. But I want to make sure I get all the sides done, because those will show sometimes either between the tiles or if they're on the end. Pretty well. Time to go. Stupid code. Okay. Fingers. Do like maybe like 3 or 4 of these, and then I'm gonna stir up the wash again just to keep it Like I said, I'm getting down near the bottom of the bottle, and I want to make sure that the color stays pretty uniform. So I go with the grain first, work it down into the nooks and crannies and crevices, and then I'm going to brush across the grain so that it concentrates in the low parts. And so that it doesn't pool up, so that the surface looks pretty uniform, at least. That's the idea. I'm holding it. The main thing is I want to hold it on the bottom, on the corners, not on the top, so that if I do rub it, some of it off or something, it doesn't affect the surface, which is the important. Doing this, I want to make sure, as much as I can, that the wash on one is pretty much the same as the wash on the others. Because when you put them next to each other, they're all interchangeable. And then you can swap one out for the other, and you can do that when it looks better if they look the same, right? We want to keep the problem with the base coat, because the base coat's the base coat, and it all looks the same all the time anyway. But the wash can be a different story. If it's on thicker, a heavier coat on some tiles than on others, and so I will, if this were paint, it would be overbrushed. But with the wash, it's more forgiving. It puddles up in the lower surfaces pretty nicely, and it shows the wood grain. So I'll do one more with what's in the puddle here. And then fill up the bottle again before I squeeze any more out. It's probably excessively stirring, but keeping the pigment uniform, or as uniform as possible as the bottle gets used up is important. Discovered that once when we were doing black wash on some stone tiles, is we had the wash, we didn't have the stirring machine, so we were just doing it by hand and shaking it, and the pigment had all settled down to the bottom of the bottle, and the tiles we did later in this in the sequence turned out to be way darker than the ones first. We actually had to just give up on some and repaint them because they came out way too dark. But we don't really want that to happen here. Even though it's a very pretty color, we want some uniformity in the way these things look. Are 4 that are done. They're providing that. And I'll do another 3 depending on how I've managed to do in terms of little measuring things. I'll do another 3, it looks like, and then do the process of restirring and again, just painting it with the grain and then against the grain, getting it down into the nooks and crannies, and then going around to get it dark where I want it dark and light where I want it light. Edges. Are less critical in terms of uniformity, but you want them covered at least, otherwise so it really jump out and look unfinished. So there we go. Moving kind of quickly because this stuff does dry out and gum up in the well here, in the little palette, and then it becomes less usable. I don't know how much it shows on the stream, but the difference between the washed and the great washed and the great unwashed, right? Whatever that cliche was from, I don't even remember where it started or why. But it's one. Anyway, in terms of these tiles at least, the difference in appearance where they are washed and unwashed is really amazing. It's not just that the wash brings out the texture of the wood grain, but the undercoat, the base coat, is really dull. I mean, it's a very pretty color and all, but it's incredibly lifeless. This is put on. It looks really good. Yeah, I mean, you find one that's sort of dry. You can see the difference. Not just the color, but I mean, it's a nice dark color, and you can see the wood grain patterns really well. Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic change. Right now, some places, especially if you're doing, display pieces, where you're just doing like one, you're doing a set for a model and you want it to look absolutely, totally, beautifully realistic, we'll do a lot of dry brushing instead of washing. And Nikki's pretty good at dry brushing and using that as a technique, and we have done that on like minifigs. But when you're trying to at least as much mass produce as you can with all of these hand painted things, because these are all printed here, primed here, and as you can see, actually really, when we say hand painted, I am painting it with my hand. So that's not an exaggeration or just a marketing ploy. These are hand painted right here in Michigan, USA. Okay, or wherever that is important in terms of production. But yeah, anyway, when you're trying to do this on sort of a almost commercial scale level and doing it all hand painted like this, and especially these things that take multiple steps, like this is printed and then the magnets are put in and the base is glued on, and then it's primed, and then it's base coated, and then it's washed. Dry brushing, especially by someone who is as unskilled at it as me, would just be next to impossible. So we found these washes and they work really well. And this wash on the brown is particularly pretty. We tried 3 different colors of brown washes on 3 different colors of brown base coat. And we unanimously chose this combination as just looking the best. In some ways, it's almost too pretty for some things. You've got a tavern floor, and it's just kind of like the Scum Bar in Monkey Island. If it's that kind of tavern, you probably want the floor to look worn out and dirty, but yeah, you can always do that later. You can take a really pretty new floor and make it look scuzzy. Take a scuzzy floor and make it look pretty, you have to start it. Anyway, yeah, we picked this combination of colors, and they really work well on the wood. So we use it for the wooden floors and for the wood beams in our stucco walls, and as you have seen, also for the doors and the chests and the crates. So far, these are all looking pretty uniform, which is nice. The technique of pushing the wash down into the crevices between the boards and into the wood grain. So I'm doing it with the grain to push it down in there, and then against the grain to take it off the top and leave it in the crevices. On all 4 sides, because even though you don't really see them very much, it's possible that anyway, you don't want it to look nice. You don't want to have like unpainted or unfinished sides of these tiles, so it's worth the extra couple of seconds to do that. And then we got the last one, and there should be maybe just enough. I might have to squeeze out a little bit more. It looks like I will to successfully finish this. But I've also got those countertops that I will probably do as well. They need to be done, at least the tops of them. Of the stuff I've done today, I mean, there's little bits of things that need to be completed yet. Like the trapdoor, I didn't do the bottom of the trapdoor because I wanted to finish the top, but the bottom of the trapdoor needs to be done. That needs to be base coated. You probably have to wait till Wednesday for me to get to that. The top of it has to dry. I'm going to wash the tops. Wash the tops of these guys, but the bottom won't be done. The doors are done, base coated and washed. The lintels are done. So on Wednesday, when I get back to this, what I will be doing primarily is working on the metal parts of the doors and the chests, and show you the I'm just getting the edges of this. We have some crates, and there's a few minutes left. I'm going to do the inside parts in a different brown color, but first I want to brush across the grain here. See that? See how it brings the wood grain out? That sort of disappeared otherwise. It's really cool. How that looks. But yeah, I'm doing the same thing on this as I was with the floors, as I'm working it into the wood grain, because it's pretty deep on this print. I'm working it into the wood grain by going with it and then brushing across to make the deep spots darker and the high spots a little lighter. And then trying to get the edges here. Get the bottoms of it. And I'll get the bottoms of these. Stay, hopefully I'll remember that. Yeah, this captures the wood grain really well. But wrap this up. So these crates here, the color, the light brown color, is going to be the raised portion, all these cross braces, but the underneath part is actually a darker brown. And so what I'm going to do in the last few minutes of this particular stream is give this a stir. Hasn't been used in a long time. So if you think the cap of this is messy because I was touching it, no, it's intentionally messy, because one of the conventions that we started doing, since we have multiple bottles of the same color, is splotching the tops and caps of a particular color when the bottle's open. Because in the past we have had like 2 or 3, one time even 3 open bottles of the same color of paint, which was really not very good. So we said, well, this one's open, we'll splotch the top, so I know it's in use. Going over and using this thing to mix up this paint that hasn't been used enough. So I'm going to take these guys off of here, because they're dry enough now, and use this sticky tack holder to hold this while I paint the base coat and the inner panels of these crates. to... I can use this big brush. We just need some thorough cleaning. Holding a lot of that ink. You can see how much is, even after sitting in the water for a while, just still coming on. It's a smaller brush. It is now clean. It's not a very, it'll be good for this because I need to get it into the crevices and into the corners. It's kind of like the panels where on what the steel doors are, but I need to get the paint down into those crevices there and up against all of these edges. Just soak in the water in the meantime. So, yeah, I'm just going to paint these. There's 5 sides that need to be painted on these crates, and we'll start on this side because that's what I picked up. Getting it down. This is a darker brown. It's like melted dark chocolate. And I want to get it into these little crevices between the boards and up into all of these, because when I paint the top, a raised surface, paint might not come all the way down to the lower surface, and I don't want to have a bright spot. Is intentionally making the edges look really messy. Okay, with this brush, and if you paint over something that was already painted, it picks up a lot of the paint. I don't like that. I'm going to give up on that and use my antique brush. It is antique. I think I was using this brush. "15 years ago to paint Warhammer goblins and orcs." It's held up really quite well. It's held up actually better than the expensive brush that I was using before, that Nikki had been using, that has stopped being usable. Whatever these bristles are made of is the material that if I buy a new brush I want to use. So, I don't know. Red Sable. I can still read it. Yeah. I want red sable bristles. They work really well with these acrylic paints. So you can see them in the print. The boards are very distinct. I want to make sure I get the paint in the cracks between them. Like I said, up on all around on these edges, so that when I paint the edges from the top, the primer doesn't show through. So getting this done, the base coat on the dark brown parts of these crates will be the last thing I'll do on this stream. And then I will do a recap of what was done today and a preview of what I'll be doing on Wednesday. And take us to the end of our more or less ending at 2 o'clock Eastern time, streaming time. Who joined in today. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 10 until 2 Eastern Standard Time. at least until daylight savings time comes back around again. We'll be continuing our painting of dungeon tiles, and to some extent some of the special detail features that come with it, like crates and chests. Be even, since we've got those primed now, the flame and gas cloud traps. I think those have to have magnets installed first before they're painted. So those might be like Friday or next week. But we'll be doing dungeon tiles because there's a bunch that need to be base coated in blue, and then have accent blocks painted in that have been primed and are sitting over there waiting for attention. So I'm just going to go around this crate and make sure that I've got, especially looking down at it, top and the sides, painted up onto the sides high enough so that when I paint the upper parts later, it's uniformly colored and there isn't any of the primer showing through. I don't know how much touch-up this brown will need. There isn't much surface area, but possible the paint will pull away from like the spaces between the boards. So we'll see. So that one is done. Then the raised part, this part, will actually be done in the same color as the base coat for the floors and the doors. The wash is different though. These crates are not washed in the same smoky ink. Reading this correctly, the crates are done with a gray wash. Actually, I'm not the one who tested that, so I don't know how that's going to look. But we will find out. It's not the dark gray that we've used on the stone. It's much less pigmented, much less heavily pigmented. So it's a pretty light gray color. But apparently, someone tested it, not liked the way it looked, so that's how we'll paint them, according to the color instructions. And we'll probably see that, we might even see that by the end of the stream Wednesday, depending if one of the first things I do Wednesday is if I paint the raised surfaces here with the flat earth brown that we've been using for our wood. If I paint those first in the stream, then it should be dry after break, and I can put the gray wash on and see how it looks. It'll be something new for me as well as for you. Made this brush Atlas. Okay, it's not an ad for Atlas. I was just curious about who made a 15-year-old brush that is still holding up really quite well. I'm surprised I can even read it. This paint's gotten on the handle over all those years. Anyway, I just want to rotate this and look to make sure I got paint on the bottom and in the corners. I'll do that. This is the top of the crate here. You definitely want to get it into these spots between the boards. This one will be looking down on it. This is the brush. You might even be using a finer brush, like a 3-bristle brush, to be doing the metal straps. Doors, because I really don't want paint lapsing over onto the wooden surface after it's been washed. Just touching up something that's washed after being base coated. I mean, basically you have to just do the whole surface. You can't just do a spot unless it's tiny, tiny, tiny. Okay, so this is starting to dry. So you can see, I don't have anything. Well, you can kind of see how dark that is. Okay. And then the lighter color will contrast pretty significantly with that. And I think the gray wash will look kind of interesting on the lighter flat earth color. So, to recap, what I have done today is finished base coating, like the backs of these, the trap door in the chest, got the base coat in all the panels on these doors, and then the stuff dried enough that I was able to do the wash. These floor tiles, they all look pretty decent. They came out pretty uniform. This one's a little darker, but actually the print, the texture of the print is different. And I got all these. Can I rotate it this way? No. I can't lift it up. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 14 doors. I got those washed. Got some base coat done on these guys so that I can paint the raised surfaces on all the crates. I will be doing that Wednesday so that it can dry, and I want to see how the gray wash looks. I'll be doing little things like the backs of the trap door and the bottoms of the countertops. These need to be washed. This needs to be base coated and washed. I want the top to dry before I do that. I'll be painting the metal straps on this crate and the metal frames and lattice on here. That'll take a while. All sorts of things there. And before I do that, I'll be painting the silver on the straps and the door handles of these guys, because those will then need yet a final touch-up with a black wash to highlight the nails that are holding the straps on. So you can see the door snap, kind of match the floors now. And yeah, that's what I'll be doing Wednesday. Be doing metal frames, metal straps, crate highlights, the straps and a door handle on the trap door. That needs to be done. And then little bits and pieces of things that need to be finished, like I said, the backs of the trap doors that I hopefully will remember. So as we're wrapping up here, I will clean my brushes to use up the last few minutes of the stream. want to thank everybody for joining in, whether you watched it on the stream or whether you're seeing this on YouTube later, or even just listening to it, because I try to fill the time with talking about things of no consequence, like SpaceX versus the space launch system. And what will we talk about on Wednesday? I think I will talk about refereeing in various and sundry sports. Okay? Because I was watching the World Cup, and there's this huge playing field, and there's like one referee out there, and I have to say that even to my totally untrained eye, the ref missed some obvious flagrant fouls and then called a couple of things that didn't even happen. So we'll talk about refereeing in various and sundry different sports, the accuracy of it, but also I think we'll talk about athletes as actors, and in the various and sundry sports, their ability to call attention of the ref to either accurately or in many cases inaccurately call penalties. Yeah, so we'll probably talk about that, because why not? Can't do religion or politics. I don't know what else is off limits, but oh yeah, if you would like to support us, please feel free to be a follower. You can be a sponsor on Twitch, or if you really like what you see either here and or our Dungeons and Dragons campaign when on Sundays at 2-3 Sundays a month, ongoing campaign, a lot of fun to watch or listen to. If you like all of that, please feel free to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/diceanddungeons. See the inside of my coffee mug there. Yeah, please feel free to do that. That would be much appreciated. We will see you again in 2 days on Wednesday at 10, give or take a couple of minutes. Thanks all, and we'll see you then.